attacking the oil refineries, which, it depends who you listen to, but an average figure seems to be that they've destroyed about 20% of Russia's ability to refine and produce fuel, and a lot of it for domestic consumption. And you don't have to look deep into social media to see massive queues of cars trying to get fuel, and that's if there is any fuel available. Even I understand in St. Petersburg, it's very difficult to get fuel. And, this is really, not only is it cutting off the sort of foreign currency of selling all this stuff outside Russia, but actually it's really beginning to hit the rank and file. And I think that's really clever, because it is the rank and file at the moment who seem to be the only ones who might have an influence on what Putin and the Kremlin does next.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now today, on day 1309, I think it is, of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation or full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we're privileged to be talking again to Hamish De Bretton Gordon. Now Hamish is a director of Doctors Under Fire, former British Army colonel, expert on CBRN and biosecurity, and of course your book is Chemical Warrior, but you've got a new book coming out next year on tanks. We'll discuss that when that comes out. But Hamish, welcome back to Frontline.
Philip, thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, well, looking at what's going on tactically in Ukraine at the moment, we're hearing of Ukrainian advances in Sumy. The Russians had advanced at the north of the Cauldron, just north of Pokrovsk, and pushed into Ukrainian defences quite a way. But Ukrainians have now cut them off with elements of the Azov Corps and seem to be pushing back. The Russians aren't getting it all their own way on the front line. What are you hearing?
Well, I agree. And actually, only 10 days ago, I met one of my contacts who's an American army officer who has been serving with the Ukrainian army now since before the war started, and his area at the moment is pretty much near Petrovsk. So I won't say who he is or what his name is, but I've known him for some time now, and certainly sort of trust what he says. Now, he was really reiterating what you're suggesting there, Philip, that actually, particularly in the Petrovsk area, Ukraine has been making some really sort of important steps forward. Although we heard a lot a few months ago about the Russians making some inroads with their sort of motorcycle troops and others, but in fairly small numbers. And he was telling me that they might take 500 meters a kilometer in the morning, and they've lost it by the afternoon because they are very poorly trained conscripts, and what they haven't really worked out is the whole logistics piece and the support piece. So although they sort of can break through, and if they focus on one particular area, they very quickly run out of ammunition, run out of steam. And it would appear, as we're hearing, that the Ukrainians are far better organized now, and in places like Sumy and Petrovsk are making some significant advances, and in the particular area you mentioned, there seem to be quite a few hundred Russian soldiers that are potentially cut off. So I don't think the Russians are having it all their own way. We've discussed before. My view is that the Russian army is probably culminated or is close to it. In other words, it's sort of run out of steam because they can't train all these conscripts they're getting. Although they still seem to be able to get enough ammunition. You'll know as well as I do, actually, you need to know what you're doing to be able to, first of all, sort of make a significant inroad, but then, it's no good if you lose it, minutes after you've taken it. So, and that seems fairly typical. So it would appear the lines are pretty static. If anything now, the Ukrainians are pushing. And we may have discussed a couple of weeks ago, one of the latest UK Ministry of Defence intelligence updates assessed that actually if Russia was to take the whole of the Donbass, which Putin seems to be saying is the requirement for him to come to the negotiation table, that could take a couple of years and could cost 2 million more casualties. So I think on the ground, tactically, Ukraine is if it's not in the ascendancy, it's certainly getting on the front foot. And Russia really doesn't show any signs of being able to make any significant breakthroughs in the areas we've discussed, or really anywhere on the sort of 900 mile contact line.
Yeah, well, that UK Defence Intelligence Assessment said 4.4 years at current advance rates, and it took into consideration, and you're right, about another 2 million casualties on the Russian side alone. But the Ukrainian response to the Russian advances in across their defensive positions, and the Russian, there was one breakthrough that they've cut off, was using their new core structure, and they use the Azov Corps. Now, you and I have worked at corps level from a planning and executing operations. And the complexity of core level operations is not something to be taken with a pinch of salt. And it seems as if the Ukrainians have adapted their military tactics and are bringing this core level of coordination to good effect on the battlefield. Do you think this is significant?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely so, Phil. This is not this is a really complex activity and operation. And the core that you and I grew up with in Germany doesn't, certainly from a British perspective, doesn't really exist. This is where several divisions or two or three divisions are operating together and in unison. And it's the harnessing of not just the infantry and the tanks, the artillery, the drones, the air power, and the intelligence. It takes a significant amount of work. Now, we know that NATO trainers and experts, have been helping at the higher levels of command, the sort of, rather than the lower level tactical level, the sort of the company and the battalion, as people would understand it, at the much higher level, really complex, takes a hell of a lot of training. It's what NATO is really good at. I mean, crikey, when one talks about how NATO would perform against Russia, actually, when it comes to the big decisions and the big operations, those are the sort of things that we trained at and continue to be trained at, in great detail. And actually, if you can get that right, I mean, what Russia hasn't got right, they might be able to do a few sort of company level. We're talking about 100 men or so attacks. But unless you can get thousands of soldiers and tanks and armor and everything else moving in the same direction, all synchronized together, you're very unlikely to break this sort of stalemate. But as you say, the Avos Corps, some of the stuff they're doing, we recognize as, almost the operational level of warfare, the core level, the much larger level. And in order to do that is pretty significant. They certainly, haven't shown much evidence over the last couple of years, but no doubt they've been getting a lot of training and a lot of advice. And that really gives hope, I think, that actually if we can get other things moving forward and other things to support Ukraine, then they can be in a much better position rather than always hearing about the devastation and everything else that's going on. So there are these different levels of warfare happening in Ukraine, and it's what we see on our TV channels is sort of the drones and the incursions that we'll talk about in a minute into NATO space, but actually what's happening on the ground is hugely significant, and the ability to make change, which Ukraine is it's really hard won and it's really difficult, but after nearly 4 years they seem to be in a much better position in the fight, as it were, than the Russians are. And again, it frustrates people like you and I that they're not given the wherewithal to be able to make the best of the capabilities that we know that they now are demonstrating on the battlefield.
Yeah, well, we'll not get into discussion as to whether a core is a tactical level formation or an operational level formation. I used to enjoy that debate with various commanders of the Allied Rapid Reaction Corps and would always raise an eyebrow when they said, no, we're tactical. There's no way at that sort of level could we say that. It's coordinating tactical activity. But getting into the proper operational level, the Ukrainians are having an increasing amount of success using their long-range drones and their special operations executive type activities across Crimea, attacking Russian air defense capability, and logistic infrastructure, across Russia attacking their ability to continue to fund the war by attacking its oil infrastructure. How important do you think that tactic is from a Ukrainian perspective?
Absolutely crucial absolutely crucial. I was seeing a report yesterday, the day before, of them taking out some of the key air defense radars in Crimea. I mean, that is exactly what they should be doing.
Oh, the Kirch Bridge is next, almost certainly. They're clearing a path to get to there.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll know better than I. The whole intelligence, shaping the intelligence battlefield, and really degrading behind the Russian front line. So, yeah, it is vital, and the fact that they now have the capability to do it is great. It sort of suggests to me that American intelligence is still, on full tap, as it were, which was great and absolutely how it should be. But their deep strikes into Russia. Really, from the Mark One of Operation Spider's Web, attacking destroying the strategic nuclear jets, to attacking the oil refineries, which it depends who you listen to, but an average figure seems to be that they've destroyed about 20% of Russia's ability to refine and produce fuel, and a lot of it for domestic consumption. And you don't have to look deep into social media to see massive queues of cars trying to get fuel, and that's if there is any fuel available. Even I understand in St. Petersburg, it's very difficult to get fuel, and this is really, not only is it cutting off the sort of foreign currency of selling all this stuff outside Russia, but actually it's really beginning to hit the rank and file. And I think that's really clever, because it is the rank and file at the moment who seem to be the only ones who might have an influence on what Putin and the Kremlin does next. And one can, again, one doesn't want to half back to Afghanistan, but when things went really bad for the Russians there in the 80s, it was actually the people who got the government to change. Now, very different type of leadership now than it was then. But having said that, it's exactly what they should be doing. They're playing to their strengths. They don't have, the 600, 700,000 soldiers to put into the front line to face up. But what they do have, it seems to me, a really well-oiled and trained and motivated special operations executive, whatever we want to call it, doing some really, having a strategic impact by some of the attacks that they're doing. And on the oil industry, it seems to make a hell of a lot of sense. And not only just that, but drones in Moscow last night. We understand, the airport is only just opening now, and again, that is hitting your average Russian who's still trying to get somewhere for a bit of a last minute summer holiday. So what they're doing there is really impressive, and will probably have more impact than a lot of other things that they might be doing.
Yeah, the one thing that Vladimir Putin fears more than anything is the people rising up and bringing the war to the Russian people. The reality of it is something that I think is worrying Putin. But Putin's worrying seems to be at the minute, his activity to try and deal with that is Shahed drones over Poland, MiG-31s flying into Estonian airspace, potentially large commercial type drones flying over Copenhagen airport. We've had reports of drones coming from ships over critical infrastructure across Germany and other parts of Europe as well. Do you think that this level of Russian aggression is getting the right response from NATO and from European countries? Or do you think there's more that we should be doing?
Well, it's a huge balance, and very interesting hearing. We've UN meeting at the moment in New York. We've had some Article 4 meetings as well with NATO on the back of the Poles and the Estonians. I think the Polish foreign minister's talk in New York yesterday was very clear and pretty unequivocal, saying in effect the next Russian drone or aircraft that comes into Polish airspace is going to get shot down. And don't come whining to us if that happens. So I think, what we've seen is the Russians probing. Obviously, how far can they push NATO? And I think we are now really a sort of old Western style gunslingers, in a shootout, and virtually the two looking at each other. And will what has been said by NATO in the last 24 hours be enough to stop? Which, as you said, has been a heck of a lot. And I think the Norwegian Prime Minister has also said today, that we've had 3 Russian jets incursion to our airspace in the last couple of months. Now, they've been silent to it hitherto, but now everybody's sort of going, well, this is a lot of activity here. And as we know, and as the listeners and watchers should understand, you can't do this by accident. Those drones in Poland were not by accident. They might go off course by a few meters, 10 meters or so, but not by a few kilometers or tens of kilometers. Similar to the MiG-31s that flew in Estonian airspace. You just wouldn't. I'm no pilot, but I understand you just wouldn't go off that course, especially in this sort of environment. So these are deliberate acts. And, as you say, the Danish Prime Minister is pretty certain that the drones flying over Copenhagen had some sort of Russian DNA on them, as with the ones in Oslo. So, I think the stakes are really ramping up. And it strikes me, and I might be reading this wrongly, that the next one is going to get, NATO is going to take them down. NATO jets did, of course, take down the Russian drones that came into Poland last week, but the ramping up to actually fight and knock down a manned aircraft, a Russian fighter jet, that will be significant, and it will be, I don't think, as there are lots of people speculating, if we do that, then bang, we're straight into an Article 5.
No, the Turks have done it with Russian jets coming from Syria, and they did that within seconds of it crossing the Turkish border, having pre-warned them beforehand, and that didn't result in the Russians then starting World War III. So, I think the precedent has been set, and we just need to push the button.
Entirely, you're right. And of course, that was the last Russian jet that went into Turkish airspace out of Syrian airspace. And as a piece I wrote in the other newspaper over the weekend was really, Putin only understands and respects military strength. So, all this hot air coming out means nothing to him. He starts losing a couple of MiG-31s, and that will change his dynamic. And I don't think it will be to escalate, because actually, when you see the 100 or so F-35 Bs and As arrayed in Eastern Europe at the moment against a Russian Air Force, which security chums of mine are telling me are pretty much a spent force, then Putin will know that, and we know that. So let's hope that people like the Poles will keep their nerve, as they've said, and will support them, and Russia will see that and back off.
Yeah, but my reading of we've had 2 Article 4s called by 2 different nations in NATO in the past 10 days. But my reading of Article 4 is it's the British equivalent of a collective stiff letter. Instead of a stiff letter signed by the Prime Minister going off to the ambassador of Russia in London, this is all of the NATO nations getting together and saying, you've been really, really, really naughty. Don't do it again. And here's a collectively signed stiff letter. Do you think we need something above that, but below Article 5, to really send a clear message? Do we need to be aggressive towards Russia?
Well, I think it's a really finely balanced thing. And you're right. The Article 4 is, it is a bit of hot air, be it a letter as such. But it's drawn a line in the sand. Now, if it doesn't work, I think absolutely. And I've been calling for a few weeks now is actually NATO to put in a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine. I think that would be really important thing for NATO to do. And this is a no-fly zone to protect civilian targets. This isn't this isn't to protect the Ukraine military as such. This is a bit like the no-fly zone that we put in northern Iraq in 1991 after the end of the first Gulf War to protect the Kurdish race. And that worked incredibly well and saved the Kurdish race. In a similar way, seeing all these civilians being attacked in Ukraine, actually, if NATO and NATO jets with the capabilities they have wouldn't necessarily need to be in Ukraine airspace to create a no-fly zone, say 200 kilometers into Ukraine. So, yeah, I think to me, I'd like to see that now, but it would be a way to demonstrate to Russia and Putin that we are really, really serious about this. And I think actually we NATO, European NATO, are looking at this, and the use of Royal Air Force Typhoons now to patrol Polish skies, and admittedly they're flying out of the UK and not out of Poland, it's a step in the right direction.
But do you think these steps in the right direction? They're all seem to be not achieving an awful lot, and Donald Trump is remaining very quiet. What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, I think Trump's ambiguity is really, really unhelpful. That sort of it's the worst thing you can have in a standoff like this. The way you read it, and if you're sat where we are, we're sort of reading it that Trump is sort of leaning on Putin, but not very hard, and not really having much of an impact. So I think NATO, European countries really need to pick up the cudgel here and really demonstrate that they're full behind this. Otherwise, I think Putin is going to keep pressing, and he probably thinks that he's got really nothing to lose here. He's getting on a bit, and if he doesn't succeed in subjugating Ukraine and trying to redraw the old USSR Soviet Union boundaries, he's sort of failed, because he said this so demonstrably over the last 10 years. And unless he sees a big hammer waiting to thump him, he's going to keep going, and that's really down to European NATO countries. Now, I think we just can't rely on President Trump. He seems more concerned about autism and paracetamol than actually trying to prevent, war in Europe. And I think that's a good message, hopefully, to European leaders. We need to get on it and move forward. And I really like what I'm hearing out of Poland at the moment. They seem to be fessing up, and we need to get behind them and really support them and back up what verbiage we're getting out of New York at the moment. And if a Russian jet does come across the border, it needs to go down. And I agree with you. I don't think it'll change anything from the Russian perspective. But I also think we need to start, getting on the front foot and being more forceful than, just being reactive and defensive. And the final bit here, Phil, of course, as you and I learnt at Sandhurst, sometimes, attack is the best form of defense.
Oh, very much so. And the resolve, I read your fantastic piece on the quality of the officers that are going through at the minute, and I agree with you completely. We too often put our youth down when actually, they are as good, if not better than us, and the level of training is there as well. But Hamish, I think we're under a little bit of time pressure in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me again on Frontline.
Thanks very much for having me.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.